So there's an amicus brief that was filed, Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, as a friend to the court supporting this Mississippi law. We wanted to get Mike Lee's thoughts on what happened yesterday and where the court may be headed. Hi, Mike.
Hello. Good to be with you.
Yeah, good to have you. So tell me, I can't wait to hear.
Look, there were really strong arguments made yesterday. They made a great case against Roe and against Casey. At the end of the day, as I pointed out in the front of the court brief that I submitted along with Senators Hawley and Cruz, there isn't a constitutional case to be made for Roe and Casey, nor is there a case for applying stare decisis, deferring to the court's own prior precedent here, because that precedent has proven so unworkable. Shoot, the lower courts, let alone the Supreme Court itself, can't even agree on what Roe and Casey mean and what its outer bound limits are. And for that very reason, it can't stand. But there's a reason for that. When you make something up out of whole cloth, when it has no foundation at all in the Constitution or in 500 years of Anglo-American jurisprudence, things are going to get really messed up, and that's exactly what has happened. I think yesterday a compelling case was made for the fact that Roe and Casey will be overruled and that the Mississippi law will be upheld.
So in your conclusion on this amicus brief, you say the status quo is unattainable, where legal doctrine has repeatedly failed to offer clarity, where it is proved unworkable in the past and will likely engender unpredictable consequences in the future. Its existence constitutes an open invitation to judges to interpret it according to their own policy preferences, usurping the constitutional prerogatives of the legislature. That actually, I think, is the other side feels kind of the same way. That you can't have you cannot have a halfway measure here. It's either all in or all out.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the answer has to be all in. And the reason, Glenn, is this is a legislative determination. It is not a judicial one. It's not rooted in the Constitution. And to be very, very clear, it's important to remind ourselves that overturning Roe and Casey does not mean that abortion would all of a sudden automatically be unlawful throughout the United States of America. It doesn't make it illegal, doesn't make it criminal. It simply says people can decide these things through their elected lawmakers. And the folks in Mississippi have decided that they want to protect unborn human life after 15 weeks of development, after the baby has developed eyelids and fingers and toes, and the baby can suck her thumb. Other states might decide to do differently. I suspect that the abortion laws in Massachusetts and New York, post-overturning of Roe and Casey, would look different from those in Mississippi or Utah.
I think, Mike, I think they're going
That's what we live in. That's our form of government.
I think that we are looking at because we're not going to limit it to 15 weeks. If this is overturned, Texas and Mississippi, they're going to say, no abortion here. But you're going to see the opposite in California and Massachusetts and New York. You're going to see, maybe I can kill them after they're born, because that's really where they're going. It's a death cult, and that's really where they're headed. That's what they want. And I think you're going to see. I think you're going to see some real crazy but eye-opening decisions in states if this is overturned. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. That's how the Constitution works. People are allowed to enact foolish, crazy, ridiculous laws in their respective states. Not every bad idea is unconstitutional. And no matter how bad their laws get in this area, it doesn't mean that they can't do it. Our constitutional structure is set up in such a way as to allow people to enact the laws that they deem appropriate, subject to certain limitations imposed on the states by the Constitution, as long as you don't transgress one of those. And abortion isn't on the list of things that states can't do in the Constitution, then you're okay.
So when you had, I think it was Kagan yesterday that said, there's lots of things. No, it was Sotomayor. There's a lot of things that are not in the Constitution. I actually cheered for that because they were going for what specifically, what right in the Constitution is being violated. And they couldn't really come up with one. They asked several times, what is it that you're saying is constitutionally protected here? And Sotomayor came out and said, well, there's lots of things that aren't in the Constitution. Well, yes, doesn't that make the case for Mississippi that it goes back, according to the 10th Amendment, to the people and the states?
Yes, that is absolutely what it says. By the way, speaking of Justice Sotomayor, I thought she was very tone deaf on this and so many issues. One lowlight of the entire conversation was when Justice Sotomayor very offensively stated that a baby's reaction to painful stimuli in the womb does not necessarily indicate that the child, in fact, feels pain. And she referenced people in vegetative states that have some muscle movement to painful stimulus. What the heck is that supposed to mean?
Hang on just a second. Let me play that cut.
They're not people?
Cut 18 from Sotomayor. Here's what he's talking about.
The literature is filled with episodes of people who are completely and utterly brain dead responding to stimuli. There's about 40% of dead people who, if you touch their feet, the foot will recoil. There are spontaneous acts by dead brain people. So I don't think that a response to by a fetus necessarily proves that there's a sensation of pain or that there's consciousness.
Well, what position? The science will show that's not true. Follow the science. I hate to say that. The science will show that's not true. But what in her judicial role, Mike, gives her thought that maybe that's a good constitutional point to throw out there?
I almost hesitate to answer the question because it's so gruesome. But I think she somehow thinks that unless a person is able to communicate with the world, if they are in a vegetative state or if they are, as she put it, dead brain people. I don't know what a dead brain person is. I assume she meant brain dead people, that they're not human life. See, that's the essence of what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with human beings who are deemed less than human. Glenn, bad things happen in any civilization. Bad things have happened in our civilization whenever we have allowed societies to treat some people as not human. That's exactly what's happening here. And they've made it up out of whole cloth. Look, we need to get back to the Constitution here, and we need to allow elected lawmakers to make laws, not 9 lawyers dressed up in robes.
I will tell you this, Mike, that I really believe, I read an article that said pretty much the same thing today from the Federalist, that the response will be, in the end, from the right, Mike Lee, that Mike Lee will be the next Supreme Court justice. If this fails, we are so fed up with giving and, well, we're just going to trust and we didn't really know for sure. We want to know. We want to know. It's time to know. Do you believe that that is a constitutionally protected right or not? And if you say no, it's not, great. If you say, well, I'm not sure, I wouldn't want to speak out about that, goodbye. It's time to know that our Supreme Court justices understand the Constitution and read it the same way as the people who are electing the president to choose that person.
It would be a novel concept for us to know that. It's especially important when you live in an era in which judges have taken upon themselves the mantle of lawmakers. I look forward to the day when that's no longer the case. But I want to be very clear. This is that case. This needs to happen now in this case. There isn't really going to be a better opportunity than this case. If they try to find a middle ground on this one, if they try to preserve Roe and Casey while upholding this law, it doesn't work.
Why?
It's not going to work because we will be saddled with the same infirm foundation that we've had for 48 years. Look, there were 19 years that passed between when Roe was decided in 1973 and Casey was decided in 1992. The time that decision was rendered, Justice Kennedy proclaimed for the court, oh, okay, the debate is finally over. We're finally putting this to rest. 19 years after Roe. 29 years have now elapsed since Casey to now. It hasn't been put to rest. And it hasn't been because it's built on nothing. And you can't take a debatable matter in society and render it beyond debate while quoting the Constitution, unless what you're quoting from the Constitution actually supports what you say it does. This isn't going away. This case has to be decided, and that decision has to involve overturning Roe versus Wade.
Looking at their case on the other side fairly, from their perspective, can you find anything in what they say that ties to the Constitution? Not the way you read it, but the way they read it. Can you find, because I couldn't find it yesterday, and I think that Thomas and others were like, where? What are we talking about? Can you find what they're saying is constitutionally protected?
No, you can't find it.
And have they articulated anything?
Yeah. Well, if they explain it. Now, very rarely, when you try to pin someone down, will they go through all the motions to explain it. But if you could, for those who could go through the analysis, they couldn't do it without falling back on these really weird terms, talking about emanations collectively overlapping and forming penumbras, going out from freestanding existing constitutional protections that are themselves broad enough to cover privacy within the marital bedroom, extending to the killing of an unborn child. Those kinds of verbal gymnastics are what you have to go through, adding inference upon inference based on language that's not even in the Constitution.
That's how they got to the Fifth Amendment. I think because I heard them quote the Fifth Amendment. I'm looking at it and I'm like, there's nothing in the Fifth Amendment that would even remotely cover abortion. Is there?
Okay, so they would have been more likely referring to the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. We're dealing with a state law here. The 14th Amendment's due process clause deals with the states. The Fifth Amendment's due process clause deals with Congress, with the federal government. And so they believe that it's an outgrowth of due process, therefore the 14th Amendment's version of the due process clause. And that due process, when read in conjunction with other freestanding protections in the Bill of Rights, includes abortion, because there are emanations from each of those freestanding protections, and those form penumbras, or these shadowy things. It makes no sense. Look, when my twin boys, James and John, were in junior high, I required them to read Griswold versus Connecticut, which was the predecessor case to Roe versus Wade. I put them in different parts of the house. I wanted them to read it and just see what they thought. They could both recognize in junior high that this was made up, that this was like an insult to verbal gymnastics. These were contortions. They were deceptions.
Let me pretend I didn't know that.
Acting as lawmakers.
Let me pretend I didn't know that case by heart. What was the name of it again? That you had your sons read?
Connecticut.
What is it?
Yes, Griswold versus Connecticut.
Okay, I'm going to read that.
I'm sure this is discussed all the time at the dinner table.
Oh, yeah, and my kids, I had them read it, but long before I had them read it in fourth grade, but that's a different story. Real quick, guys, I've got to go to a network break, but Mike, how does this end, do you think?
I believe it ends with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I think there will likely be 5 votes, possibly 6, to overturn Roe and Casey. The Supreme Court, the 9 justices alone, no staff, anyone else, will meet tomorrow afternoon in private to discuss the case. The case will then be more or less decided. We won't know what the outcome is until likely late June.
Wow.
So,
Mike.
if you're a praying person, I'd encourage you to pray for the court between now and tomorrow.
Thank you so much. God bless you, Mike. Thanks.
Thank you.
Senator Mike Lee from Utah, and I hope someday a Supreme Court justice.